Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Chicago Justice Podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Siska. I'm also Executive Director of the Chicago Justice Project. You can find out more about what we do and our current fundraising campaign at chicagojustice.org. Today, I bring you an interview with Nicole Negrete from the Final Five campaign, the campaign to close the last five juvenile, well, they call them youth centers in Illinois, but they're basically just juvenile prisons or juvenile youth detention centers. There's one, the juvenile temporary detention centers over kind of near Little Italy, over by the FBI, over by the hospital, the medical district in Chicago. And then there's four more spread across the state. And the state is actually building another one, even though the population has gone down from, God, I think it was 1,200 to about 100 kids now. Why they're building a new one, who knows? Okay, anyways, we'll be talking to Nicole about all of that. But first, real quick, go to CJP's in the midst of our 15-year annual 15th anniversary celebration for fundraising, celebrating what we do and trying to get funds to keep up what we're doing. So you go to chicagojustice.org and click donate in the upper right-hand corner. You can also drop us a line on any of our social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and we're probably on more. We're on YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube, we're obviously on YouTube. You can drop us a note anywhere there or at info@chicagojustice.org if you want to help us fundraise and fundraise from your friends, families, colleagues. That would be great. We have a couple people already doing that for us, and more is always welcome. Also, a couple other updates. If you're watching this on YouTube, and if you're not, you listen to podcasts, coming up on YouTube in the next week, you'll start seeing much more frequent posting on YouTube and Facebook around policy, short policy videos on policy, criminal justice policy, public policy, analysis of media coverage. The podcast can be much more focused on interviews and the shorter stuff around policies and media coverage of things. The horrible story by the Sun-Times recently on arrests related to violence in Chicago while they were down. It's a really bad one. Anyways, that stuff's going to be much more on YouTube and Facebook and possibly moving to TikTok and to our Instagram feed. So that's all going to be revving up in the next week or two. And also, there are going to be podcast extras and behind the scenes and strategy, how CJP is doing with strategy videos about how we're doing our FOIA and transparency and litigation work at our Patreon. You can go to Patreon and just search Chicago Justice Project. You will find us, and you can get access by becoming a donor there. And I think you can do it as little as $5 or $10 a month, and you'll get all the content everyone else does. So we'd really appreciate it. Okay. So we have a really great interview. It's really interesting hearing the perspective on juvenile detention facilities, juvenile jails, whatever you want to call them, from the perspective of youth that have been affected by it, either incarcerated or had their loved ones or friends incarcerated. And that's where we get with this interview with Nicole Negrete. We're really happy she chose to sit down with us. So I will be back after that conversation. Nicole Negrete from the Final Five campaign. Thank you so much for jumping on the pod. We really appreciate it.
Hi, thanks, Tracy. It's great to be here talking to you.
All right, so explain to my audience, what is the Final Five campaign?
Yes, the Final Five campaign, we're a group of directly impacted young people and allies, and we're calling on Illinois to close down the 5 remaining youth prisons and then in turn use the cost savings to fund community-directed resources and responses to harm. Directly impacted young people means currently and formerly incarcerated youth, as well as young people who have been impacted by incarceration of their family members or community members. So just anyone who's felt those impacts. So we're really led by youth and young adults who have experienced themselves and are very aware of what goes on both in the state youth prison facilities as well as other detention facilities around the state.
So when I came across, being an older gentleman that I am, when I came across this campaign, it brought to memories of me of whenever I hear about youth detention facilities, I think of Philadelphia. I think of what happened in Pennsylvania, where the judges, there's a documentary about it. I actually was on a call with one of the lawyers way before the documentary was even thought of, but with judges taking kickbacks to throw youth into a juvenile detention facility. At least that's what the documentary alleged. So that was one of the reasons why I was so attracted to getting you on, is because I wanted to find out if that's what was going on here, or if it's just run of the mill, just bad justice system. So when you say like, let's say, give us an idea of like what type of allegations, I should say, would get someone a youth incarcerated in a juvenile youth facility. I guess is what youth center is what I'm supposed to call it, right? What
Yes.
type of behaviors? What's the range of behaviors that would get youth locked up in these facilities?
Right. So yes, in Illinois, how they refer to the state-run youth prisons is Illinois Youth Centers, or IYCs. Within the campaign, we refer to them as youth prisons. That's what they are. So that's probably how I'll just refer to it throughout the
That's
rest.
fine.
But there's been quite a history of these youth centers over the last years, and since IDJJ, the Illinois Department of Juvenile Justice, was created as its own agency. But so 10 years ago, you could see really youth with like any type of violation in there, even as much as little as 10 years ago when the population was much higher. Many technical violations, so things related to curfew, even just like arguments with parents. One lawyer told me once about a client who was over 18, but like sent back to IDJJ for 6 months because he drank a beer on a Friday night. So, back 10 years ago, it could run the gamut of the smallest of violations. A lot of changes have happened since then. And now, what IDJJ kind of communicates is that they only detain youth with the most serious of offenses. So if they break it down by felony class, most of them are in like the class 3 and 4 felonies, not as many of the class 1 and 2. And no, they since changed it so that juveniles cannot be sent to the facilities for misdemeanors. So, from IDJJ's standpoint, it's young people who have committed, quote unquote, the most serious of crimes. So, various types of like aggravated battery. There's a small number of murder cases in there.
So besides just, I think more or less being an abolition focused organization, what have been, and just being against them, which I can understand that, have there been problems in how these youth centers have been run? What have been the experiences besides just the problem of locking youth up in general? What are literally the problems that the youth are experiencing in the centers?
Yeah, well, like you said, or as you alluded to, and I'll just state this explicitly, we are an abolitionist organization. We believe that kids, teens, young adults, really any adults for that member, should be locked up. We believe it's harmful. We believe it's ineffective. So then on top of that, there have been many, many issues with the Illinois youth prisons over the years. As I mentioned, our campaign, we are a group of majority directly impacted young people, many of whom have been incarcerated in the facilities. And this includes some young people who were there, within the last, more than 5 years ago. So back when things were even worse. And it was back then, even as little as like 7 years ago and going beyond that, there were just countless reports and non-reports of staff abuse, whether it be through physical assault, provoking fights within the youth. There's been plenty of instances of sexual relations between the youth and the staff members that have resulted in some people getting pregnant and kids being born that way. So, so that type of staff abuse really ran the gamut of every type of thing that could be happening. Historically, some of the facilities have just been in really terrible condition, people finding like lice or bed bugs, pests of various types. So, just general like facility degrading. And then just in terms of what they're actually able to do in the facilities, their school, other programming, other resources is just really limited. The school is like a joke practically. They kind of just put them on a computer and have them go through the lessons. Programming, particularly during COVID, is really inconsistent, especially when you're thinking of some of the facilities that are not in Chicago or not close to Chicago. There's just really not much for the youth to do. So it's just a lot of isolation, poor conditions around them, potentially abusive, or, at the very least, like just very not staff members who, yeah, are either abusive or, have try to practice some type of like control over the youth that's more than what's warranted. Just to, like we hear this from both the formerly incarcerated young people, and we work with some currently incarcerated young people, just talking about how, correctional officers will just try to exert the control in whatever way when it's really not necessary, or try to find ways to get the youth to act out so then they can put them in isolation for a behavioral hold or something like that. So it really runs the gamut of all the possible problems that you could imagine there could be in a detention facility.
So if you look in traditionally and even currently, are there racial or socioeconomic trends in the youth that end up in these facilities?
Very much so. So at any given time, the racial breakdown is 70% or higher are Black youth, which, compared to the percentage of Black youth that there are in the state, it makes up like somewhere around 20% or a little under that. So that's a huge disparity right there. Just how many Black youth are locked up in the facilities. And definitely socioeconomic plays a big role as well, in talking to members of our campaign and other incarcerated young people. We hear a lot about just issues with, wherever they came home from, like either they're not really like around their parents who have a stable income, or their parents don't have a stable income if they are living with them, or just in general sharing about how, their electricity has always been turned off, being unhoused or just unstably housed. So like in general, just I don't know as much about in terms of like what the I don't know as much in terms of, statistically what percentage come from what socioeconomic class, but from hearing from the youth, it's very clear that many of them come from communities and homes where they just really do not have access to a lot of income or resources.
All right. So are there people in the state that have benefited or are still benefiting from these facilities being opened or existing?
Definitely. Yes, definitely. So the IDJJ budget for the 2021 fiscal year was a little over $120 million. And at any given time, there's somewhere between, it's the total number of youth in the facilities, it's been hovering around like 100, 120. It's a bit higher right now, closer to 150. But, if you do simple math and break that down and think about how much money is being spent per youth in the system, it's a lot. And much of that money is going towards staff salaries. So in large part, the staff are people who greatly benefit from this. They're part of the same unions as IDOC, the Illinois Department of Corrections, that runs all the county jails and adult state prisons. They have a very strong union. They make very good salaries, have the opportunity to get pensions, all these things. So I would say that they're some of the people who like kind of benefit the most, if you're looking at it really tangibly. And then I would say, I don't know, anything about what happened in Pennsylvania. I don't know anything about that in terms of like judges getting kickbacks for, sending young people to these facilities. I could imagine that could have been part of it back in the day when they were just sending, basically everyone that they could. I could totally see that being part of it, but I haven't personally heard about any of that. But ultimately, it's a lot of it is, if we're thinking, kind of more like broadly in terms of who benefits, just throughout the state, whether it be just regular community members or elected officials, there's plenty who are very much more on the tough on crime train, and having youth prisons is a way to say like, it's okay, all these carjackings are happening by young people, but it's okay because we're able to send them to prison and they're able to be punished and all this stuff. So very tangibly money wise, definitely the staff, and then just in like a broader sense, anyone who operates from more of a tough on crime mindset, or just any mindset of like any safety issue needs to be dealt with just sending people away to prison. Having the youth prisons makes those people feel good.
Yeah, I imagine it's like just with IDOC, it's like I'm imagining these facilities are in rural towns.
Yes, many of
Right.
them are. So there's one in Chicago, and
Uh-huh.
then the rest are in Warrenville and St. Charles up this way, and then further down south, Pere Marquette and Harrisburg. And then they're actually building a sixth one in Lincoln, Illinois, which is where like the Logan State Prison is in the middle of the
Yes.
state.
Yeah, it's strangers for building a new one. Okay.
Yeah.
So as I looked at through some of your materials and looking up stuff on these facilities, so there used to be 10 facilities, about 1,200 youth incarcerated in them. Now there's about 5, although it seems like they're building another one, and they house now about 100 youth.
Mm-hmm.
So theoretically, doing that math, there's about 1,100 youth that are no longer incarcerated in these facilities every year. What's happening to these youth then if they're not going into these facilities?
Yeah, so a lot of that is due to, what I was mentioning before, just in terms of like what violations can ultimately land a young person in one of these facilities. Just there's limits now on who can be sent to the youth prisons, in that no misdemeanors will qualify for being sent to the youth prison, and some of the lower level felonies might not necessarily end people up there. So just that of like cutting out a whole, people who are just, might be convicted of misdemeanors or lower class felonies, they're just not being sent to the youth prisons. In some cases, they do end up on some type of diversion program or probation program. So there is the state program Redeploy Illinois, which allows local jurisdictions to have youth diverted to participate in local services rather than sending them to IDJJ. Cook County does not participate in this program. Judge Evans is very against that. So we, in Cook County, that's not as available, but in some other places, some of them do end up in diversion programs. And there was a big change in that IDJJ used to use IDOC parole agents when young people were released from the youth prison. So it was the same parole system as the adult IDOC. They changed that several years back, where IDJJ now operates its own parole probation program called Aftercare. So in the past, many young people would, have gone to a facility or be on, at the time, what was IDOC parole. They would have a technical violation and be sent back. That's changed a lot now. For IDJJ, the new system that they have is called Aftercare. What they state is that they don't send people back for technical parole violations before, exhausting trying to refer them to all types of community-based resources and services first. So technical violations fall in a lot, and there's just more young people potentially in some of these diversion programs or probation programs or something of the sort.
Okay, what types of programs need to be created to support youth in Illinois so that they're not becoming justice system involved in the beginning?
So this is a huge question, and like a huge part of our work that we focus on, along with advocating for the closure of the youth prisons. At the end of the day, my kind of smart ass answer is that like there's not like one solution that we can say, or one type of program that we can say. It's so many different things that need to happen. And at the end of the day, it really needs to come down to like talking to the young people and figuring out exactly what that is and actually putting that into action, because both within our campaign and with other young people we talk to, we talk about this a lot. Like, what would you want instead of these youth prisons? And the answers run a whole wide range from, free youth programs and after school programs, mentorship programs, a basketball court that people can use for free, ways to learn how to do various types of, workforce skills, basic needs being met like housing and food and things that just like reduce kind of like the stress and hardship that young people are experiencing, because at the end of the day it's like it's so hard to like really grow up and develop when you don't have access to so many things, when your community's been divested in, when there's no grocery stores, no good parks around you. For young people who are in more rural parts of the state, there's literally just nothing. They need things to do, places to go. So it's hard to say because there's so many different things that are needed, ranging from basic needs to infrastructure developments to programs, that should be there as a starting point. Like, this is the foundation for helping young people be able to just like grow up and thrive and stuff, without having to, resort to like crimes of desperation and whatnot. And then in terms of when harm is occurring, when youth are arrested, there's so many other types of responses to harm that could be happening, rather than isolating them from their communities and sending them away. That we talk a lot and we work a lot with restorative justice practitioners within the Final Five campaign, who do work like within communities, and like, so meaning like within neighborhoods, sometimes within even just like a few block radius of when harm is happening. People who are close to the young person who committed whatever type of harm, they are involved in helping like work through it for that person as well as for the person that they harmed. And it's much more complex than like that very simplistic explanation of it. But just other types of responses to harm that don't just automatically go to like punishment and restriction and isolation.
So are there specific parts of the state or specific cities/towns that my dog Pepper, I guess, wants to talk about it? But are there specific parts of the state that are driving the population in these facilities, or was there traditionally and is there now?
Yes, so definitely Cook County sends the most young people to the facilities by far. And then in general, its vast majority are from like the north and central regions of the state. So there are some counties that, have the highest rates, like I said, Cook County, Peoria, Rock Island, like to name a few. And, when you're thinking about Cook County, obviously that's where Chicago is. Many of the young people are coming from Chicago. And, part of it coming from, in terms of like a large population coming from here, there's a lot of different reasons: larger population in general, more policing, all that stuff. But at the same time, like I mentioned, Cook County is not redeploy Illinois, so may not have access to a lot of other these like diversion program options that other youth in other counties may have. When we're thinking of, in the central region, which, sends like it's from various counties, but somewhere around like 40% of the population is from the central region of the state. When you think there, it's, a lot of very rural areas, not a lot of resources and opportunity around there. Along with that, some of the towns have a very like prison oriented mindset, because that's where a lot of the IDOC facilities are, along with the towns, a lot of times being very white. And if you are like a Black young person in that community, you're going to be much more likely to get picked up for something than some of your other white peers in the area. So it's definitely a combination of like, the access to resources and just like access to, community-based like response to harm and everything like I was mentioning.
Okay, last question, and I ask a lot of my guests about this when we're talking about crime and violence issues. I just want to get your opinion on it. What percentage of these crime and violence that's perpetrated by youth in the state is driven in part or mostly by the effects of poverty?
I would say probably a great deal about it, or a great deal of it. Um, it's, when we think about like gun violence, community safety, crime, whatever word we're using, um, many times sometimes, the crimes are directly related to a poverty issue, whether it be burglary, stealing, um, those types of things, actually trying to like get material things to support their income needs. And at the same time, aside from those types of crimes that are like directly tied into poverty, even if something might not like on its surface look like it is, when you think about, the type of like the level of sort of like scarcity that comes with low poverty, and just like the lack of access to resources, but also lack of access to opportunities, to good spaces, all these things, like this is, these are the types of things that can lead to feelings of desperation, because you just like, you don't know where to turn, you don't know where to find your way out, or find your way to something that like is really enjoyable to you, that you're able to do in a safe way, in a way that allows you to like have all your basic needs met and everything. And then, desperation can also lead to all these various types of harm, whether it be through just who you end up around, just kind of by luck, in terms of, your low poverty or high poverty areas, oftentimes will have just like so many things going on that you could get caught up in. And a lot of it just like kind of comes from that desperation that can lead to types of like harm, or trying to just get resources for yourself, for your family. So it plays a huge role. And if we think about it in the context of Chicago specifically, it's, you just look at the city, you look at the segregation, you look at what goes into many of like the north side communities versus what goes into the south and west side communities. It's such a different life, it's such a different way of being, that at the end of the day, like I can say all this from based off my research and talking to young people and everything, but at the end of the day, again, it might be very different for some of the young people, in terms of thinking of how poverty connects to it. From a zoomed out view, I can very much look at it that way. But, for a young person, it's, what their life is what they know. So they might not necessarily tie it into poverty or something, but it's just kind of sometimes just what they know and what's around them and what's available to them. So poverty is a big part, and there's also many other things that go into it.
Yeah, I've always told people like poverty is the existential, I'm mispronouncing that horribly, existential stressor on everything you do. Every aspect of your life is impacted by that poverty.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I was said with the COVID. And like if you'd have told me before COVID hit, like 6 months before COVID hit, or like a week before it hit, like, hey, there's going to be this worldwide pandemic and it's going to affect entire countries and the entire globe, and this is what it's going to do to cities, and this is what it's going to shut down, do you think crime is going to rise? My answer would have been yes. Like, how do you not see that coming? Because all the other parts of their lives are, especially when you're talking in Chicago, are under such threat. And any major city, any city really, are under such stress all the time, that adding COVID on top of it and everything COVID does to your ability to make money and stay safe. So to me, it's all been 100% foreseeable. I'm dismayed whenever I talk to reformers or politicians, especially politicians, academic researchers. It's always like this one program is going to be the solution, the overall solution to crime and violence in the city. It's like, right. That one solution ain't poverty. It isn't going to be. It doesn't mean getting rid of poverty is going to stop every crime, because it's not.
Right.
But it's going to so seriously reduce it that we can then go and target things towards what's remaining.
Right. Yeah.
That has at least always been my view.
Yeah. And yeah, I definitely agree with that. And, so many times when people are thinking of like the solutions to crime, gun violence, whatever it may be, carjackings, so many times people are looking for that one solution or that one policy, that one type of program. And like I said before, it's so many different things, and I think a lot of times people are wary to like accept that that's the solution because there's no specific thing to point to. They want to say like this evidence-based program
Yep.
will reduce crime by this amount of percent, and like it's not that simple. Just slapping on a policy that like keeps youth out of Millennium Park, for example, or that locks them in their houses earlier, for example, that's not going to solve youth crime. It's not even a band-aid on a gunshot, to use that analogy. I don't even know what that is in comparison to like what the whole holistic view of the issue is. It's so
It's
many different things, and it takes patience and just trust that like people in their communities, that the youth, like what they're saying is like they know what they're talking about, they know what they're asking for, and it means a million different solutions, from community to community, from block to block, from family to family. So that's not an easy thing for like policymakers and elected officials to look at, because that seems very daunting and overwhelming.
yeah,
Understandably so.
but I call it propaganda. It's much easier to change the curfew an hour and say I did everything I
Mhm.
could. It's going to be the solution. It
Right,
hasn't
right.
been the solution in any city around the country.
Hmm.
And if violence is up, and all of the same types of violence are up in all the cities all over the country, almost all of them, and the smaller the city gets, the worse the crime is per capita.
Hmm.
How you're expecting any one politician, any one place to come up with that solution? And now that we're in election season in Chicago, while the midterms are coming, and then we got election season in Chicago, crime and violence are going to be used and abused for political purposes. All right, Nicole Negrete, thank you so much for jumping on with us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Happy to talk about this.
Okay, we're back. Once again, we'd like to thank Nicole Negrete for sitting down with us. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as we did. If you're listening to the podcast, links to everything involved will be up on the post on our website. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or other social media, in the notes will be links. Links for what? One thing, the documentary that I could not think of related to Philadelphia was called Cash for Kids. It's fascinating. If you get a chance and can watch it on a streaming service, I highly recommend it. I am not sure. I mean, I just think it's really interesting. I'm not saying that's what's going on in Chicago, but I think um, it adds to the conversation and the depth of knowledge around juvenile detention, not only in Illinois, but across the country. It's a fascinating documentary. The issue around incarcerating youth, I'm very happy to see that we've gone down from over 1,000 to around 150 now. I'd like to see that number lower. We have a knee-jerk reaction in this country, especially in the city of Chicago, but around the country also, to just incarcerate anyone and everyone. And it just isn't always the answer. There's no doubt about the fact that it isn't the answer for so much of what we try to make it the answer for. So it's just the whole situation's pretty sad. With people like Nicole getting up and being empowered and having a voice, there's sure good things on the horizon. And really quickly, so this is posting, I believe it's going to post on Thursday, the 21st, both in the podcast and on YouTube and Facebook shortly thereafter. We have already in the can an interview with Deborah Witzberg, the now newly installed Inspector General for the City of Chicago. She was previously the Deputy Public Safety Inspector General. She's appeared on our old live show and our podcast many times. So that interview is done and we'll be posting next week, both to the podcast and our various social media things, various social media platforms. So keep an eye out for that. And once again, if you want to get involved in donating, info@chicagojustice.org, hit us up on any of our social media. And if you got ideas for who you want to be interviewed in the podcast, drop us any, comments in any of the social media. We'd really be interested in who you think should be on the pod, and we'll try to make that work. Thank you so much.